Welcome to the Asian Supermarket. I'm your host Christina from America.
And I'm Carmen from Australia. Welcome to episode 4 with our friend Eeman. Growing up in America with an Iranian background, Eeman joins us this week to enlighten us about the wonderful aspects of Persian culture.
So grab your favorite takeout and let's chill together as we have a chat with a good friend of ours in episode 4.
Hi everyone, welcome to the first episode of Asian Supermarket. This week we have a guest with us, Eeman. He was actually born in LA to Iranian parents. He spent a while studying abroad in London and Hong Kong. And he's also spent a few months in the Greek islands in refugee camps working as a medical translator. And now he's a med student. So can't wait to have him on the show and hear what he's up to. Christina, why don't you let us know how you guys know each other?
Eeman and I met at LSE back in London, both studying abroad. So we've been in touch ever since. We like to start off our episodes with a little fun icebreaker. So what is your favorite Iranian dish? Or actually, I'm curious. I've heard people say both Iranian and Iranian. Do you want to talk about that first? What's the correct pronunciation? And then we can move on to your favorite dish.
Sure. Yeah, so for some reason it's a four-letter country name, but people can stumble with it. Kind of like with my name as well. So my name Eeman, pretty similar to Iran. We get a lot of like Iran, Iran, not exactly how it's pronounced. Yeah, the correct way of saying it is Iran. In the United States, the correct way of saying someone who is from Iran would be Iranian. You did mention Iranian, and that's actually something I learned at LSE, that in the UK and maybe in Australia as well, they do say Iranian. So they get the Iran and then it turns into Iranian, which I'll go with it. I think it's the consensus there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I would say that my parents are from Iran and my background is Iranian.
So instead of an I, we should just visualize it as an E then, right?
Yeah, so that's exactly why, like, my name a lot of times is spelled Iman, and my parents went straight up for the Eeman, try to get it as phonetic as possible.
Why don't you let us know what's your favorite Iranian dish then?
Oh yeah, my favorite Iranian dish. It's a dish called korme sabzi. It's like a vegetable stew that can be with or without meat on rice. It is my ultimate comfort food. Among my non-Iranian friends, it's a hit or miss. But I think that the number 2 would definitely be what we call cello kebab, or the typical kebab on rice. Oftentimes saffron rice, they'll have like the yellow tinge to parts of it. And that's actually the national dish of Iran. So I think that's the more quintessential Iranian dish. But honestly, I think if you ask, and I feel like any Iranians out there will challenge me on this, but if you ask most Iranians out there, what they will tell you is that like korme sabzi is the ultimate Iranian dish that you would enjoy.
That sounds delicious. I love vegetables, so I would like to try it.
Yeah.
Well, no, that's so interesting. The pronunciation as well, when you said kebab, like most people say kebab.
Yeah, so that's another
Most
British...
people do say kebab, right?
What do we say in the US, Christina?
What do you guys say in the US?
I say kebab, but I guess in Australia they say kebab.
Yeah, we say kebab.
In the UK they say kebab as well, because like they had the right by the uni, they would always have like the kebab carts out and everything.
Yeah.
I'm going to a cool food fun fact. So in Iran, also called Persia, and officially the Islamic Republic of Iran is a country in Western Asia. Some people draw as a distinction in that Persian relates to a particular ethnicity, and being Iranian, oh gosh, I have to get used to this, is a claim to a certain nationality. And for example, for Eeman, he is 75% Persian, 25% correct me if I'm wrong, is it Kurdish or?
Yeah.
Okay, Kurdish, but 100% Iranian. I'm so scared I'm gonna butcher it. And the main staples are rice, kebab, fruit, and vegetable stews.
Vegetable stews that you mentioned, there's a ton of different ones. So korme sabzi, that the kind of green vegetable. So sabzi literally means like greens or vegetables. It's more like green stew that goes on rice. But there are so many other ones. Another very common one is called fesenjan, or more colloquially fesenjun. And that's more of like a pomegranate tomato paste syrup stew that is absolutely amazing and put in rice. So that's another one. Yeah, we really, really like them. Depending on, so Los Angeles, where I'm from, has the largest actually Iranian population by numbers outside of Iran. And because of that, my opinion is where you can find the best Persian food or Iranian food outside of Iran. Depending on the restaurant you go to, you can actually get a taste platter where they'll bring the different stews out, and they bring it on what we call tadig, which means bottom of the pot, or crunchy rice that forms when you make rice. We cherish that, and you can get a tadig and taster platter to try the different stews on that, and I highly recommend it.
So why don't you tell us more about like what you do right now?
I'm from Los Angeles. I've been living in Philadelphia now for going on almost 3 years. I'm a medical student here, and it's been interesting. The first 2 years of medical school is pretty similar to kind of what you would think of college, with lectures and kind of professors learning the ropes. The third year of medical school is when we start our clinical rotations, and that's when we actually go to different clinical sites, be them clinic or in the hospital, on different services in the hospital, and kind of get our feet wet on the different avenues that exist in medicine. So I've been bobbing around from everything in pediatrics, neurology, trying to figure out where I see myself going from there. The pandemic's definitely been a twist. It was really interesting having the opportunity to be in hospitals during the pandemic and kind of getting an understanding of how scientists and medicine are fighting this. I mean, even in the time that my rotation started back in the late spring into now, we know so much more about how to treat this disease and even other diseases. It's so interesting to be in a group of doctors, getting together, going over the data from such a short amount of time even that we have, and already able to make so many important changes to patient care. So as a student, I get that question oftentimes: what is it like being a medical student in the pandemic? And there's definitely the pros and the cons. We do practice social distancing. I think there's something to be said about getting care and making connections with a patient when your face is covered in a mask and oftentimes a face shield. It's just one other barrier. But on the flip side, it's really, I think everything that we've done has been thrown for a loop, and we're trying to recalibrate that and working with doctors and kind of seeing the way the field, kind of like the gears in the field are turning to try and make up for that has been interesting this year for sure.
Is there a field you're leaning towards after rotations?
Yeah, so I still have a couple left. I'm really liking internal medicine. I think one of the reasons why that I like internal medicine is there's a lot of different avenues within internal medicine that you can go down as well. So it's almost like a cop-out. I'm still pretty undecided, but I really like how internal medicine works. And from there, you can specialize in something like cardiology, gastroenterology. But I'm on psychiatry right now, which is something I had never considered before. And it's just a completely different approach to medicine. So each one of these has been pretty eye-opening. I still have a few more to go. We'll see. I'll keep you posted.
Yeah, definitely.
And I saw that you used to do work in a refugee camp. So I'm just wondering, like, does that have any correlation with what you're studying now? Like, do you what is your goals for after?
Yeah, that's a good question. My work in the refugee camp was completely by chance, and the fact that I actually was working with a medical organization was also completely by chance. I sent out essentially a ton of different kind of interest letters to different organizations, and really just was looking for one of them to take me. And by chance, I was taken up by this Dutch NGO, Stichting Bootvluchteling, which is the foundation. And they're like, hey, we're a group of doctors. Would you feel comfortable working in a medical setting? And I said, absolutely. And that's what took me to Greece as a medical translator. At that point, I was not in medical school. I was definitely considering medicine. So it was definitely some really good insight. And the organization, while it was primarily medical, actually ran an English language course as well. And I had the opportunity to teach English to the Afghan refugees that were there. Something with Persian, the language, and why I really jumped on this opportunity was growing up being bilingual. I oftentimes wanted to find opportunities to use my mother tongue. So I think the reason why I sought this opportunity was twofold. One was it was the first time that I was really able to apply my second language outside of the home. And also, again, as a child of immigrants, as a kind of addict to international news, everything kind of fit together for me to want to go to Greece. When I was there, Afghans were making up something like the second largest group of refugees after Syrians in these camps. And the need for Persian language translators was huge. I should also probably clarify, so you're probably thinking, okay, he's Iranian, why he wants to speak Persian, why is he going to work with Afghans? So the thing is there are 3 countries that officially speak Persian. Those 3 countries are Iran, Afghanistan, and Tajikistan. Now in Afghanistan, they call the language Dari, and in Tajikistan, they call the language Tajiki. All 3 of these languages are Persian, and they're mutually intelligible between speakers.
Did you feel like there was any differences in the medical field structure, while working in so many different places?
Yeah, so I mean, now that I'm a medical student, I will say that medical education is very different in the United States versus in Europe. So a lot of the doctors that I were working with were only a few years older than me at the time. So about my age now. So it's something that you get started in your undergraduate. You start undergraduate with the intention of studying medicine. You study medicine. And so I'm not quite sure when you finish, but somewhere around 24, 25, 26, you're an MD. In the United States, I'm actually not sure how the system works in Australia, but in the United States, it's you do 4 years of undergraduate, and then after that, you take another entrance exam that's specific for going into medicine, and then you complete 4 years of medical school.
I want to ask you more about like your upbringing. So you said that you were bilingual your whole life. I guess your parents like enforced that on you.
So I definitely grew up surrounded by a lot of Iranians. Again, Los Angeles has the second largest or the largest population of Iranians outside of Iran. Certain parts of LA, we joke about it, we call it Tehrangeles. So all the stores are Iranian, all the restaurants, the food. I'm very lucky in that my whole family, including all of my grandparents, were in Los Angeles with me. So I got to have them growing up. And for me, the language wasn't really a choice. Like if I wouldn't say it was necessarily imposed, but if I wanted to communicate with my grandparents, for example, or function in family settings, I had to be able to do so in Persian. For me, I think it's funny that you bring up language. I think one of my favorite things about being Persian is the language. We're very proud of our language. We like to speak our language very loud. And for me, even to this day, I associate it with my family. I associate it with my home. it's weird. Speaking a language can give you an emotion like that. I associate it with safety and comfort and familiarity. So that's definitely something that I really like about the language. And one of my favorite things about being Persian actually is the language.
Then is there specific mannerisms you can kind of allow us to understand based on differences you've seen in Western culture versus Middle Eastern culture?
For sure. I can't necessarily speak on behalf of all Middle Eastern culture, but for Persian culture, and anyone that has an Iranian friend has probably encountered this term. It's called Taarof, and it is essentially an act of deference. It's very hard to explain. Taarof does not have a direct translation, but it's almost a dance that all Iranians will play with one another and also with other people. It's a lot of give and take and offering. For example, I'll give you an exaggerated example. You can be lost in the desert and not having seen water for days, and you find someone who offers you a glass of water. Every Iranian, whether it's genuine or not, has to instinctively say, no, please have the first sip. And it's always a game of, then they have to say, no, please, you have the first sip. And it goes back and forth and back and forth. And then depending on how genuine it is, like, okay, if they said no a few times, then it's okay to take it. But then if it's really genuine, and you have to keep going, and I don't know, it's a lot of guessing, and it can be exhausting and confusing, and no one actually knows how to do it correctly. But we all do it.
That's pretty interesting, because in Chinese culture, at the end, I don't know when you were in Hong Kong if you experienced it, but people always fight for the bill. So it's like it reminds me of that. Yeah, like who's gonna pay, stuff like that. But in America, we always split it, right? But when I was in Asia, it's always like, oh, I'll pay this time, next time, you can pay. But so it's pretty interesting, these similarities and differences.
The exact same thought process that you said. We just do that with absolutely everything.
Being born here, do you feel like with your friends that are also born here, you guys still apply this, mannerism?
100%. Yeah, no, it's
still.
It has nothing to do with where you're born. I just feel like, again, it's so deeply built into our culture.
Do you apply this with other people from other cultures?
No, I try not to.
Okay. I'm like, is this always a game?
Right? Like Iranians don't even know how to do it properly. So how am I gonna just start like dragging other people into this mess?
No, I feel like it's a good thing though. Like it really, like it shows people, like it's such a caring thing to have, even though sometimes, like you said, it might be a bit overboard, but I think it's like such a like beautiful trait to have, I guess.
With Iranians, really hospitality is extremely important to them, and I think it comes from this idea of hospitality in Iran at one point being a pretty nomadic country, and then within this very rural nomadic country, these like little oases towns that dotted it. We were in the middle of Asia, smack dab between East and West. The Silk Road marched right through Iran. The word caravan is a Persian word. The first hotels or caravanserais were in Iran for people kind of walking through the Silk Road. And so the theory that I've heard to try and explain this insane level of deference and humility and stuff like that goes back to kind of being on a long road, on a long trip in the not quite the most hospitable terrain, and having a guest being a guest, and having a guest being kind of a way that people survived, and how they made their way in the world. So,
geography wise, it is pretty close. There's a place called Uyghur, Xinjiang, Uyghur.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about Iran, if you look at the map of Asia, is we're not technically Central Asia, but we are smack dab in the middle of the map. Everyone and everything has marched right through Iran, and because of that, there's been we've been able to soak up so much from different historical cultures that have existed, and also helped spread our culture on the Silk Road. And the Uyghurs exist on the Silk Road. They exist on this path. And the Turkish people, all the Turkish tribes that exist on the steppes of Asia, spanning from Istanbul really all the way to Western China, is really influenced by Iranian culture to a certain extent. So they're definitely Turkish, and they have a strong sense of Turkish identity, but there's a lot of similarities that have grown just by being on this transit route. So
like the hierarchy system. So you mentioned that there was the culture of, letting other people, before you. But I'm just wondering, like, is that more so with, like, let's say elders or like people who are like, older than you? Do you guys have that kind of culture? Yeah.
I don't know how much of it is specifically Iranian, because that's one of those things that, like, I can be watching any comedy snippet of any cultural, like any Asian group really, and be like, wow, I completely see where you're coming from there. That I think rings true throughout the continent. The respect that you showed to elders, and the way family systems are set up, the different roles that generations play.
I'm curious, since we're talking about family, do parents make more of the because based on different we've talked with guests from all over, some countries the parents make very heavily decisions impacting their life, including marriage, right? And then in America it's pretty like we're all independent. After 18 people move on. So how is it in your culture?
I can probably best speak to Iranian American culture. I would definitely say that within the community there's a spectrum. There's definitely a large number that leave Los Angeles and kind of do their own thing, and others that staying in Los Angeles is very important to them. Starting a family very early is something that's very important to them, and encouraged by the family as well. I think I've seen a pretty even mix of everything, so it'd be hard for me to say one is more common than the other there.
How about like for Chinese culture, a lot of times when they're visiting elders, stuff like that, they would bring gifts, or if like a guy's trying to impress the girl's family, they would bring gifts. How about in your culture?
So in Iranian cultural practice around marriage that we all joke about a lot, but to a certain extent exists a little bit. It's a practice called Hastagari, and it literally means to act on asking. It's when the groom goes and essentially asks the bride's family's blessings to get married, and it's a whole ceremony where the stereotype involves the potential groom and his parents coming to the house, bringing sweets. Sweets are exchanged. The bride pours the tea. It's a bit of a ceremony there. The actual ceremonial aspect of it is definitely outdated, but I would be lying if I didn't say it does still play a part in how Iranians go about marriage. With that said, I would say, at least from my perception, that Iranians do marry quite often outside of the community. I wouldn't say that there's a huge push to marry within the community. So something that we absolutely love is bringing people into the community. You know what I mean? Like, yes, you can get married, but it will be a Persian wedding kind of thing. Like, it doesn't matter, like, if by all means go and marry a non-Iranian and welcome to the family, but the wedding will be Persian, the food will be Persian. In my opinion, the wedding will be more fun that way.
Yeah.
It's so nice to see though, like, and then I love how they always taught me like Persian things, and like they told me about like a few words.
Oh, yeah, what do you know how to say?
Tashakur. Yeah. I know they always say salom. Salom is like
I've heard that one.
So salam is hello. It comes from Arabic originally, so it's the same as Arabic.
Okay.
Yeah, tashakur. So tashakur is almost exclusively used among Afghans. Definitely when I was working in Greece, tashakur was their main go-to for thank you. Iranians, for some reason, use merci, which is the same as French.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how such a common thing like thank you ended up being borrowed from French. I mean, it's not Persian. It's definitely borrowed from French, but
yeah,
it's ubiquitously used in Iran now.
Cool. Is there a lot of differences like that? Like just like certain words that are just different, or is it like mostly it's generally similar, right?
Yeah.
If you said yeah.
It's almost entirely similar.
Yeah.
I think certain things like, for example, with Persian, a lot of the more modern and technical or educational phrases come from French. That just happened to be the language that Iranians kind of used. Like my grandparents, for example, when entering university, had to pass a French fluency exam. So I think French kind of made its way into Iranian language and culture in that manner, whereas Afghanistan was a British colony for a time. So for them, English is kind of like serves that role. Tajikistan, Russian serves that role.
Oh, that's cool. Well, speaking of language, I'm curious now. The stans, there's so many. Is there a meaning to that? Like, what does it mean? Yeah.
Stan's actually a Persian word. By the way, great pronunciation. It is not stan.
Thank you. Finally.
Yeah, Stan means land of in Persian. So something like Afghanistan literally means land of the Afghans, or the province that my grandfather is from in Iran, for example, Kurdistan, land of the Kurds. We have Loristan, which is land of the Lors. And of course, we have all the Central Asian stans, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan. That's all one of those Persian loan words into the Turkish language as well. So yeah, and I think that if you look at a map of Iran, you'll see a lot of the stans, and you kind of alluded to that in the beginning of this as well, that Iran really is like, what's the difference between Persian and Iranian? That's a question that I get a lot. And the way I try and explain that is I kind of use the United Kingdom for that, like Britain versus English. Are you British? Are you English?
Yeah.
So Persian would be to English as Iran is to British. So everyone from within the borders of Iran is Iranian, but really only something like 60% of those people are Persians or from Persian provinces. The rest come from Kurdistan, which are Kurds. They have their own language, their own history, even to a certain extent, religion is different. Azerbaijan is where the Turks, which are the second biggest group after Persians, live, and they speak the Turkish language and have a lot of that incorporated in their culture as well. So you can kind of think of it like, okay, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. In Wales, they speak Welsh, but they also speak English, and they're British, but not English.
Wow, this is really, I really love this episode because my knowledge of, of everything came from, I don't know if you guys knew a game back in the day called Age of Civilization or Age of Empires. It was a PC game. You don't? It's kind of like you built. Well, me either, but I like that one because basically you learn about different civilizations. So I knew about, Persians and stuff like that, but that's it. I didn't know about all these little details you told us today.
We're super cool if you take a look, but we're kind of lost usually. Like things kind of gloss right over, and we're usually mashed with one of the two. When I again would like to point out that Persian is actually an Indo-European language. It's more similar to Latin than it is to Arabic. After so many years of conquest, we do have many Arabic words in the language, but the structure, the grammar, the roots of the language are still more similar to the Romance languages than to Arabic.
When I was younger, right, a lot of people associate, Iran and Iraq, not Iraq, Iraq, right? Like, those countries as, being somewhat similar, right? But is there anything between these two countries where you feel like there's, big distinction, stuff like that you want to talk about?
That's an excellent question. what is the difference between Iran and Iraq? I think the major glaring difference here is one is an Arab country, and the other one is like a Iranic people's country. How are they similar? They do share a border with religion. So the official religion of Iran is Shia Islam. So from a religious point of view, not just sharing a common religion of Islam, but also the Shia Islam between the two. Another similarity between the two countries that I have to add up because of my own background is that Iraq has a huge Kurdish population.
Did you get an A in world history?
I did. I love this stuff. I absolutely love this stuff.
We're glad to have you on the show. Like,
Thank
you just crammed everything.
So much for the opportunity.
No, yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show, though.
Yeah, and I'm
nice
so excited for what you guys are doing here.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. Stay tuned for episode 5 next week. We're going to speak to a guest from Singapore who has pursued a bunch of different interesting careers, and she's now expanding her musical talents in Japan. So thank you guys for joining us, and we'll catch you next week.